Selecting and developing materials, authentic materials. One of the key characteristics of ESP courses, of which Business English is a part, is that teachers and course designers, they give value to authentic tasks being used in the class. So, authentic materials are texts which have not been produced specifically for classroom use, meaning that they have not been produced for teaching purposes. So, they could be anything from the excerpt from a subject area or part of a poem or a menu or a story. In Business English, teaching materials could be real commercial documents. They could be newspaper articles, recordings of meetings and conversations used in the workplace. These are especially valuable for teaching pre-experienced people and even for people who are working in companies and organizations. Even we see that authentic materials are used in course books in the form of real reports, in the form of case studies, and of newspaper clips. There are several advantages of using authentic materials for Business English teaching. First is that they bring in the real world, and they are at the reality level of Business English learners, because the Business English learners can directly relate to them. Then, because the Business English learners can relate to them, so they can understand the point of the training. They can understand that why they are being taught a certain language item, because that certain language item is going to be used by them in future. Then it helps the teacher to understand the needs of the learners. Then authentic materials provide us with a source of up-to-date material that can be directly relevant to Business English learners' needs. So when you bring in authentic materials from the student's workplace, it could be in the form of reports, or it could be in the form of minutes of meetings. So it is directly relevant to what the learner would be needing in his future work. Then it provides a specialist business discourse, the type of language which the learner would be using when they go into their job, start working. Of course, there are disadvantages also. Authentic materials, the use of authentic materials in the class could be commercially or legally sensitive. For example, you cannot talk about the working of a company by looking at its reports, and you cannot talk about its products and its practices. Then there are issues of confidentiality. Many companies would not want to share their authentic materials, their annual reports, or their other confidential material also, which they would not want to share with their trainees. Then the disadvantage could be that such material is not even available on the learner's part. You have asked your learners to bring in certain material, authentic material from their companies, but on the day of when you want to teach them, they would say that because of various issues, one being confidentiality, they were not able to bring in those materials. It could also be that perhaps such materials are not even available for the learners. Your class of MBA learners have not yet had any interaction of international market, or your in-group service employees have not yet had the company has not yet moved into the international market. So such authentic materials would not even be available. Then learners could also be not confident about sharing their material with other learners in the class. Then the authentic materials perhaps would not be interesting. They would be too dense, or the terminology would be or the topics would be too boring for the learners, and they are written in such complex and dense language full of specialist terminology that they would be off-putting for the learners. So the teacher would always have to adapt the authentic materials which they want to teach in the class, perhaps because they are not at the appropriate level of the learners and according to the learners' needs. Perhaps you have leafed through a lot of material to find something which is relevant, but you have not come across any substantial amount of content from all that work. And even if you have, then perhaps they are not relevant for the majority of your learners. So there are three main areas which you need to keep in mind while using authentic materials. you should try to use the context and the text from the subject area of the learner. And even if you think that perhaps they are real, whether they're real or whether they're simulated, but still it would be the language which the learners would be using in the workplace. And then use of authentic materials from learners' specialist areas should be incorporated, even if you feel that they don't look like normal English. And then you have to make your tasks as well as your text authentic, because the task would be what your students would actually be doing at their workplace.